the crisis. And I want to say that cultural studies, feminism, the post-colonial questions of race, all emerge in the moment, in the conjuncture of the crisis. Now you hear the Gramscian note again. Yes? In the conjuncture of the crisis. That crisis in the 60s, which wherever you stood in the studies of the humanities, something had shifted on you. The ground you had previously occupied had moved on you. It's like it's trying to stand in an earthquake. Let me remind you that contrary to the account which is often given of Birmingham Cultural Studies was not a Marxist form of studies. It began with an argument with Marxism. The argument was about the inevitable reductionism which we located in Marxism and how to overcome that. That is the importance of Gramsci and then Althusser. It's the importance of the so-called Marxist revival of the 70s. It could only revive because it had taken account of what we call the cultural. If it hadn't done that, it would not have been possible. Long before that, in the 50s and 60s, people like Williams had settled their accounts with an economistic Marxism. They said it wouldn't do for us. So it would only do if transformed, if reshaped, if reconfigured. So, from the very beginning, cultural studies begins with an argument. And when I look at the essays about theory, which are in the 2 collected volumes that Routledge are about to publish, I don't see the construction of a body of integrated or coherent theory. What I find is an argument with Barth, an argument with Althusser, an argument with the Frankfurt School, a fight with sociology, an argument with anthropology. Yeah? We seem to be constructing them as places, intellectual spaces, which have something we need, but which have to be raided and overthrown in order to yield up their secret message. Yeah? You have to, as it were, knock literature aside to get to what writing is about. You have to destroy traditional literary criticism to try to find out what is the nature of language. You have to, begging your pardon, interrogate the system of structural linguistics in order to get to the secret of language and discourse. Each of these terrains presented to us a resistant front, and one could only, as it were, get what one needed from them. I'm trying to describe this, therefore, not as the formation of a school, but as what I called wrestling with the angels. I think cultural studies, theory at cultural studies, developed by a series of wrestling with the angels. I remember the moment when reading Capital, I got to the point where, Althusser says, of course you know whether theory is right or not because of the internal relationships between the concepts, not because of its reference to anything else. And I thought, stop, can't be quite like that. What we have to deal with is a more complicated question, which is, not the return of the real of politics, but the way in which politics itself is constructed through representation. It is part of a discursive field, and yet it has real effects. It affects the lives of people. It is shaping the world in which we live. Now, how to occupy these 2 positions, a position which recognizes the cultural turn, because that is what we're talking about, how culture began to intervene in other fields of knowledge, to deconstruct them. In some ways, cultural studies is in difficulties nowadays because it's never been forgiven for that moment. The sociologists, remember in their deep heads, the moment when, having read about 3 sociological texts, we told them what was wrong with sociology. And the literary critics will never forgive us for being the door through which literary theory entered the study of literary texts. So I was responsible for a very unfortunate metaphor in describing the intervention of feminism in cultural studies. I said cultural studies, feminism came into cultural studies like a thief in the night. It came in through the window and it crapped on the table. It's a very strong metaphor, and I apologize till the end of time for it. But what I will not apologize for is for what I meant by it. And people imagine, what I meant was we were going along quite well, and then feminism came in. I meant, of course, immediately the opposite. Of course it crapped on the table. It needed to be crapped on. That's how theory moves. You crap on the table of those things which are already, which have become organic, conceptual, traditional knowledge. You pass on the knowledge to everybody else, and there it stays. It reproduces itself, and then all of a sudden, somebody comes and craps on the table. And then oh, now we have to do some thinking. Now we have to think. Now we have to ask ourselves what it is we're doing, what are we about, what matters and doesn't matter, what is important, what have other people thought that we can, this is called doing theory. It's not called producing theory, and it's certainly not called ventriloquizing theorists we have read. That's to say, writing as if we were sort of little Derridas or little Foucaults or little Deleuze's. Yeah? That is not what thinking is about. Thinking is about trying to get at the concepts which provide, as Foucault said, a toolbox for thinking the present moment, for thinking the present conjuncture, intellectually, in disciplinary terms, in political terms, in personal terms. That's what it's about. So, crapping on the table is how cultural studies moved on. Yeah? Settling around a Gramscian orthodoxy, feminism. Beginning to settle, not never settling, but beginning to settle with the interruption of feminism, race. Difference. Yes? I see it said cultural studies in this period moved from one series of rows to another. Yeah? That is how theory develops. If it doesn't matter enough to quarrel about it, don't bother with it. It's a technical exercise. Yeah? It's only worthwhile if it really interrupts something which you have come to hold as constituting your intellectual being. Okay? Then you have a fight on your hands, and that's when the new ideas come.